All right, peace and blessings, everyone, and welcome back to the STEM Files, where we are the voice of STEM talent and Black culture. On tonight's episode, we're going to be welcoming back to the platform McPherson Aldonza. He's an experienced electrical engineer with years of experience, veteran engineer, electrical engineer, excuse me, with years of experience in solar power development. Stay tuned for more after this. All right. Greetings, everyone, and once again, welcome back to the STEM Files, where we are the voice of STEM talent and Black culture, where we also highlight the best and brightest in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. I am Tariq Muhammad, aka Tariq Cardiac. I'm a biomedical research scientist with a concentration in cardiovascular pathobiology, which is the study of how diseases form in the heart and blood vessels. Joined by my right-hand man, Jabril.
Peace and love, everyone. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Jabril Muhammad, civilian mechanical engineer focusing on naval ship fluid systems with a background in material science and engineering. Always happy to be here. Always happy to bring the energy and get it popping as we always do. Let's continue. Let's get it in.
Excellent. And Mr. Aldonza, welcome back to the STEM Files. How are you, sir?
Man, blessings. I'm great, beloved. Thank you both brothers for welcoming me back. It's the highest honor. So I guess I said something that made sense last time. So
right. We did. It definitely did.
Absolutely.
And I'm honored to be a good brother. Then we're gonna get it in, man. Let me say my simple disclosure first for all the fellow nerds out there. I did this in honor of y'all today. I had to rep.
Yes, sir.
Let's go.
Had to come through. Come through.
Yes, because like I was saying, for those of you who comic book nerds like us, seeing y'all intro at the Marvel, I didn't see to the last time, so I had to come and honor both of you today, representing King T'Challa.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much.
Sir.
We appreciate that. Absolutely.
You can talk about that Black Panther 2 a little bit later too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hot take. I
gotta touch on that.
Yes, sir.
All right, cool. So the last time you were on the show was, I think, a few months ago, back in October, and you were talking about solar panels. So in today's episode, we're going to shift it a little bit differently. We're going to talk about battery technology, or the different types of batteries, how you develop them, how you make them. So before we go into that, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you currently do, and why this episode is important?
Thank you, good brother. Again, my name is McPherson. Just call me Brother Mac. What can I say about myself? I'm a father, husband, son. This career path I started about 12 years during the Great Recession of 2008 is a second career for me. So I had a whole career in business management, corporate operational management for Fortune 5 and some global 500 companies. And basically during 2008, I was one of the 20 million Americans who was sitting on the unemployment line. It was bad. Any of you remember that? But from there, the biggest blessing came. I always had a peripheral interest in solar. So I told my wife, I said, hey, honey, I think I'm going to check out the solar thing. And, to President Obama's credit, when he came in to office, he passed a lot of money in the stimulus plan for green and renewable energy training. So I just took advantage of it, man. I went ham. I went hard in the paint. I racked up, 2-3 years straight, just getting every certification, schooling, everything related to construction, solar, project management. And then in the course of me doing my solar certifications, I realized that solar is really a subdivision of the electrical trade. So for me to be able to maximize my career path in the solar industry, always with the full intent to eventually go into entrepreneurship, but was for me to go to electrician school. So I went to electrician school, worked my way up, became a journeyman electrician. I've worked for all the large and big solar companies and other companies you've heard of. Yes, the Teslas, the Sunruns, worked for led projects, done all those companies. And so my vision is what the STEM File is about. Us taking the best of us in Black America and in the Black diaspora, those of us who are in those spaces and those fields, and aggregating and bringing us together so we can leverage it for the best of us, man. So that's where I'm at right now. About 2.5 years ago, I was largely, let me say this last quick, and then I'll answer your question. I started, like most guys, in residential systems. I've done hundreds of residential systems. And that's not saying a lot in the solar industry. If you work for any of the big companies, on average, you do a solar install, you complete one or every day, every 2 days. So if you're in the industry 3 years, you just by default, you do hundreds of systems. But more importantly for me, I worked purposely with my career. I worked through all the different companies, taking the best practices of all of them, the best technologies from all of them. Again, with the eventual goal that I could do what I'm doing now, where I can leverage it and teach and train and bring that to my customers. But I worked in residential, I worked in commercial, and the one largest thing I'd say in my resume is that I've done extensive utility scale solar. So I've worked as a commission manager, commission field tech training other electricians and solar professionals, where we would build and commission 120 megawatt solar farms that could power 30,000 homes. So the main thing, as I referenced in our first interview, and you'll see it being mirrored today, is that the principles are all the same. It's just a scale that's different. So what we're going to go over batteries today is going to be a smaller microcosm of the big utility or commercial or residential, if you're talking about doing a battery system to power your home.
Absolutely.
Before we can, excellent. Before we continue, I just want to put this in here. Us at the STEM Files, and we want to do this as much as we can until it blows over. Us at the STEM Files will not be discussing the events that took place in DC 2 weeks ago. Yeah. So please, for those who are watching, please do not drop any comments regarding that. All right?
Yes,
all right, now we can continue.
No, I'm good with that disclaimer.
Yes, sir.
Awesome. Jabril?
Yeah, man. That was dope. I love how you broke that down, and you kind of got right into some of what we were talking about beforehand with regard to, the theoretical and the practical, right? So we're talking about battery technology. We're talking about a time where it's important to understand the nature of power, electrical power, other energy sources with regard to power, how to harness it for your needs. So can you kind of start to break down basically for us, and we all use them, but what is a battery? What are the types of batteries? How do we start to then understand that for different applications?
That's why I love you, man, because you great minds, just such great minds, both of you brothers, because you teed up for me almost like a
take your time.
Because everything you write, we're taught to always go to the root knowledge to break it down. And I think a definition I heard of, so this is can you guys see that? Can you brothers see
yes.
that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that's my LCD tablet, writing tablet. So I'm going to use this. Give me my writing board to explain certain things. So you said it. What fundamentally is a battery? And the definition of a battery is a very simple definition. A battery is a device that chemically stores direct current.
Right.
Battery is a device that chemically stores direct current. Let's unpack that. Well, why did I say direct current? Well, is there another type of current or electricity that we use? Yes. It's alternating current. The current that's flowing through your home right now that's powering all your lights and receptacles, we utilize alternating current. So batteries, like solar panels, can only produce direct current. You can almost think of direct current like nature's current, because when you see lightning strikes, that's direct current. When you see when you get shocked from static electricity, that's a form of direct current, meaning that sound wave haven't been alternating and so batteries, all batteries have a chemical process that's going on. We were basically harnessing electrons, because the foundation of all electricity is electrons. We're producing, we're harnessing electrons. If you take an atom, you have the nucleus, you have a proton, an electron. The electron being negatively charged. So in all electricity, all we're doing is harnessing electrons and making it do what we want it to do. We put it on some wire, and then we run it through different types of circuitry and components, diodes, batteries, capacitors, resistors, so on and so forth. But at the heart of all electrical power generation or usage is electrons. It's a subatomic material electron. That's what we're harnessing. So what a battery allows you to do, and all batteries have what's called an anode and a cathode.
Right.
So this is an 18650 lithium ion 3 amp hour or 3000 milliamp hour battery. Every battery has an anode and a cathode. So the electrons flow in, an anode, it stores it, and when you discharge it, go to the cathode until you recharge it. So whether the battery chemistry is lead acid, lithium ion phosphate, lithium titanate, any wet lead acid, seal lead acid, gel lead acid, it doesn't matter what type of chemistry, it doesn't matter what scale, whether we're talking about an individual cell like this is a 3.7 volt, 300 milliamp or 3 amp hour or milliamp amp hour, 300 milliamp hour or 3 amp hour battery, or we're talking about the largest battery utility scale, I believe, is the one Tesla built in Australia as a peaker to replace a peaker plant, and we'll talk about what that means. Whatever the scale you're talking about, or a Tesla Powerwall hanging in a garage, or any of the other batteries, they all do the same. They all have the same, meet the same definition. It's a device that chemically stores direct current. Did that answer the question, brother?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You definitely did. And just for everyone, for some clarity, a couple terms. So he talked about voltage. He talked about amperage. Okay, amps or AMPs. That's the measure for current, right? So your current, which is the variable I. Your voltage, right? Voltage is related to resistance and current. Correct me if I'm wrong, beloved. That's V equals IR, correct?
Right. So we're doing Ohm's law. So
right. All right, I done took it there. My bad, y'all.
Well, IR.
Anybody that knows Jabril wouldn't expect anything less. So.
Lake Salam, Brother Daniel Ford, Lake Salam, Sister Yolanda. Thank you, Norwood Hurst, for rocking with us. Yep, there you go, right there.
So correct. So the I stands for amperage or current, R is resistance, and V is voltage. Right.
Yes, sir.
So
yes, sir.
The product of I and R, V, and you're right. If I want to solve for voltage, I divide so on and so forth. You guys get that simple formula here.
Yes, sir.
We also utilize the other formula for our purposes. The Ohm's law chart. We talk about wattage, watts or power. I did that bad, but so
yes, sir. There you go.
The wattage or power, actually this should be P. I mean, it's the same thing. So P, wattage, I, amperage, V, voltage, and that's the other chart. We use the Ohm's law. So both of those principles, what you're referring to, Brother Jabril.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for, I think I nerded out just a little bit too much there. I think I got it into the weeds. So as we're moving forward, we understand we're unpacking battery. We know they're chemically storing current for end use. So, we want to get into some of the end use, right? You're doing battery technology and as it relates to solar, right? So then how are we then taking this know-how, taking the capabilities that batteries have and then transitioning it to solar power, which is very applicable to generating power in a great way for a home, for a community, for a society.
Okay, so I'm gonna answer your question referencing first on a residential, because I think a lot of our audience and people generally ultimately want to, well, how can this affect me? How can I make this applicable to me and my household? How can we leverage this technology to affect us and where we're going as a species, humanity, in terms of how we're generating our energy and what the next 100, 200, 300 years is going to look like in terms of technology. Right. So let's use our residential level to answer your question. We have to go back to solar panels. We'll go back because the battery is really, there's some clarification needs to be made. and I think our first interview I referenced some of the misnomers that people assume. If you're driving down the street and you see someone with solar panels on their home, your natural assumption is that, hey, if we're in a grid down situation, right, whether someone hits a transformer or a hurricane or earthquake or some natural disaster, or the grid just goes down because it maintains, whatever the reasoning is, if your neighborhood goes out of power, everyone's in the dark, your assumption is that the people with solar panels on their roof are going to have power, whereas the rest of you guys in the neighborhood won't have power, right?
Right. Right.
That's incorrect. That's an incorrect assumption. And the reason it's important to make that distinction is because we talked about there are three main types of solar systems. We talked about grid tied, we talked about full off grid, and then we talked about grid tied with battery backup.
Right.
And again, I'm talking on a residential scale model. So 98% of all solar systems you see on people's homes around the country, largely residential, not maybe a cabin, but anything you see in a residential, or even the commercial scale ones you'll see in a parking lot or on commercial buildings, those are all what we call grid tied systems, meaning there is no battery and there's no battery storage. All that happens is sunlight hits those solar panels, the solar cells takes the photon energy, and almost like a plant using photosynthesis, taking sunlight to produce food for itself, the solar cells take the photon energy and it releases those electrons we reference. It produces direct current. It produces electricity, specifically direct current. That direct current is then harnessed and it goes down to a device called an inverter, a grid-tied inverter. And then that grid-tied inverter, all it does, it takes that DC power and it inverts it from direct current into alternating current, because that's what we use on our national grid. Again, we reference the the voltage, the amperage wars between Tesla, the actual Tesla, and what's the thief's name? Tom Edison.
Right.
Yeah. So that goes back to the alternate. So Thomas Edison wanted our national grid to be based on direct current, and Tesla, to his credit and his genius and brilliance, he won out that war, the electrical war, and our national grid, and now the national grid of every country in the world, is largely based on alternating current. So my point is, the solar panels, that DC power is aggregated. It goes through some device called an inverter, and we'll talk about the different types. And it goes to an inverter, and the inverter inverts it from direct current into alternating current. And then that alternating current is backfed into your main service panel to feed your home, all the loads in your home.
Right.
Whatever loads in your home that's going on, whatever you have, from swimming pool, HVAC, your lights, your outlets, your fans, every load that you would have in your home, it pulls that solar power coming in first. Whatever is left over, because oftentimes, particularly in the summer months or whatever reason, you maybe not just running a lot of equipment, appliances, your solar system is going to produce more power than your home can consume.
Right.
So your home is going to say, I was going to say literally, well, hey, Jabril, you have this 8 kilowatt solar system on your roof, but right now the home is only consuming 2 kilowatts of power.
Right.
What do you want me to do with this excess 6 kilowatt? What it does is, in all the grid-tied systems around the world, the country I reference, that power can't just poof, go nowhere. What it does is it backfeeds back onto the grid, turning your meter backwards, and then the utility basically takes that power that's backfed onto the grid, and then it feeds the loads of other people. So you can think of it, you're actually giving power back to the utility and feeding your neighbors and feeding everyone else. Now, if you have a net meter agreement with that utility, whatever utility you have wherever you live, if they have a net meter agreement with you, then what happens is that excess power that you're backfeeding, you will be credited for it. And it's almost like a bank account. You're depositing those kilowatt hours. So then you say, well, Brother Mac, at nighttime, when there's no solar panels can produce power at nighttime, they need sunlight. Interestingly enough, if you have moonlight and you test a solar panel, there actually is voltage. Not enough.
Talk about it.
Current. Yes, there's no usable current, but they actually, because we know the moon reflects sunlight. So if you ever did that test, Yes, sir. No, there actually is voltage on the solar panel, but not enough to do anything or to harm you. But my point is, your solar, a grid-tied solar system with no battery storage, it cannot store that power. So it essentially sends the power back onto the grid. And all utility grids, what they do, they manage the grid. It's like a symphony. They have to anticipate how much power all their ratepayers are going to need, and they need to produce that enough power to meet the need. If they don't have enough power, then the power factor, the frequency will be off, and then it could end up crashing the grid. Or in the case if they send too much power, they'll send a surge, your breakers trip, and then they have to reset it. It's really a balance, a dance, all utility grids do. That's why you have places like the Caribbean islands or Hawaii where there are closed off loop. It's even more tenuous for them to be able to manage it, because in the United States, for instance, all the 40 contiguous states, with the exception of Texas, all of our states, the 40 contiguous states, our utility grids are all interconnected. So if Jabril is in Virginia and a adjoining state needs some more power because we know the summer months are coming and people are going to be running the air conditioning unit, so the demand is going to be high, but maybe that utility has a boiler, they have a generator that's down, that's being serviced, but we still need to meet the demands of our customers. Well, that utility in Virginia could call over to South Carolina and say, hey, can you send us some extra power on the lines? And they can do that every day, or they can sell back to each other, so on and so forth. So it's a symphony. That's my point. So to get back to the question as far as residential storage and how batteries interface, again, that's grid tied. Is 98% of systems, solar systems, do not have any battery storage. Then we talk about off-grid systems where you're not tied to the grid at all. There is no utility meter. There is no service drop coming in your home. You're on your own. Whatever you produce or don't produce, it's on you. So those type of solar systems, it's complete inverse. The heart of that system is not the solar panel. The heart of the system is batteries. Everything is built around the battery and how much battery capacity you have, because essentially that inverter, you remember we mentioned solar panels produce direct current and batteries also produce direct current, only direct current. An inverter can take power from the solar panel if it's a grid tied system or hybrid inverter, and it can produce alternating current. Or it can take power from the battery and likewise invert that DC power from the battery and produce alternating current. So in an off-grid system, the heart of the system is the battery, because the inverter, which powers all the loads in this off-grid house or home or business, whatever we have, it pulls the power from the batteries, and then the batteries are recharged from the solar panel. Does that make sense? So you have to think of it differently. In this case, your actual heart of the system, what's actually feeding you is the battery. In this case, a solar panel is a source to refuel the battery, if you want to use that metaphor. Does that make sense?
Right. Absolutely. Yes. And I'm so glad that you broke that down. Brother Daniel, does that answer your question? You had a really good question, and I think he answered it when he talked about the differences between on-grid and off-grid systems. So for all my survivalists, my doomsday preppers, all of you, if you don't know already, you do not want to invest yourself in an on-grid or grid-tied system, because when the ish hits the fan, you will hit the fan with the itch. Right? So with the zombie apocalypse, you want the off-grid system. So praise be to our brother Daniel. Thank you so much. Sister Norwood, or Brother Norwood, I think that is. So we need our own distributed generation systems. Yes, we do, beloved. We need to understand power at its core, understand electricity, and be able to utilize the different generation systems for our different areas and also come together. That was awesome. I love when you talk, because it reminds me, you put so much pressure on me to really tune in and listen. And you use a lot of terms and you speak fast like me. So it just kind of gets me back into that mode of being a student and really being able to I feel like I'm taking mental notes and trying to get all those things. But I'm going to turn it back over to Tariq. I feel like I've been talking too much.
No, you good, brother. I'm humble by the comments. Good, brother.
This is normal Jabril to me, so I don't know what you're talking about, man. All right, excellent. This has been an amazing show. And before we continue, for those of you who are watching, or would like to know more about our content, definitely visit us on Facebook, The STEM Files, YouTube, The STEM Files, and follow us at The STEM Files on Instagram and Twitter. We are live every Thursday and Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Jabrine Engineer, Tariq Cardiac. So this show or this particular episode is not just about talking. We want to also do some demonstrations or see some physical practicality going on live right in front of us. So Mr. Aldonza Q, please show us what you got behind you. I know you got some treats behind you. Show us what you got.
We got a little preview. Actually, I'm gonna do that for you, Brother Tariq. Before I do that, though, I'm remiss because if anyone, all the brilliant people watching this show will scrutinize and say, Brother Mac, you said there are 3 types of solar systems, and I only described 2. The third one, let me just briefly. The third one, we said there was grid tied, which is about 98% of all systems. Then we mentioned full off-grid, battery-based off-grid. The third time I mentioned was grid tied with battery backup. And I think that's kind of almost self-explanatory. But the distinction I need to make is, again, in the context. So I'm meeting with one of my customers here locally in LA on Monday in Orange County. And we're going to be, he wants a grid tied with a battery backup system. So, excuse me. And what that means is, your inverter, he's still tied to the utility grid. He's still going to be tied to SoCal Edison out here. His solar system is still going to be a net metered system where we have to do all the same engineering and design and permitting, and his system is still going to have the ability to backfeed onto the utility and get credits. But more importantly, if we have a down grid situation, zombie apocalypse or anything else, his system will be able to produce power when no one else in the neighborhood has power. Now, the only difference right now as an industry, while we make the distinction, is because usually batteries are still relatively expensive, and we'll go into some of those specifics. Now, it's coming down. It's come down precipitously, dropped a lot, particularly the past year to 3 years. It's come down huge. Not as much as solar panels. Like when I started in the industry, solar panel, an average solar panel was maybe about $400 or $500 per. Now I could get a solar panel twice the amount of wattage for $120 to $300, depending on what type you're getting. So solar panel pricing is just nosedive in the past 8-9 years. Batteries are not there yet. They're on a downward trajectory, but we're not there yet. But we're a place where it makes financial sense for the end average consumer. Relative to the cost of solar, because solar is not a inexpensive endeavor, so to speak.
Right.
But to answer your point, the grid tie with battery backup, the distinction is usually the batteries we will put in a grid with battery backup, it's not designed to power your entire home necessarily. It's designed to power what we call the critical loads. So if we were in a grid down system, hurricane, again, any natural disaster or pick whatever scenario, your most important thing you're going to want is your refrigerator on, right? You want to be able to keep your food cool so all your food doesn't spoil. You want lights. You want some power to be able to power your laptop, your internet, so you have communication, your TV. If you have someone in the home who may be older who requires a permanent HVAC, air conditioning unit, then we may want to make additional costs, but for air conditioner or a pool pump or electric stove, those type of specific high power, high draw loads, we usually don't include, right? It's what we call the critical loads. And again, we let the customer choose. But my point is most residential battery backup systems are sized usually traditionally like the Tesla Powerwall that everyone's familiar with. Fortress battery, there's a number of them I could list off that I've installed today. All of them usually SolarEdge and the LG Chem battery. All of those systems are usually can support about 30 amps worth of loads. So if you need more, basically just buy more batteries and we put them in parallel to increase your capacity. But again, the biggest variable in solar or any power generation system is really your budget. Because if Tariq says, hey, Brother Mac, I'm worth $10 million, money is not an issue. Well, I could put enough batteries to power your home and your 5 neighbors' home if money is not an issue.
Yes,
but again, just keeping it relative to what's normal, quote unquote, That's what a battery backup system is designed to power your critical loads in a grid down system and to renew itself, regenerate the battery to the solar panel. But it's not designed necessarily like a full off grid that you size and design and engineer it to power everything. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Very
absolutely.
quickly, and before we go to the demonstration, I want to shout out Sister Yolanda Moody again for your question, and Bronzeville for your question as well. We will definitely be getting them, because as you heard Brother Max talk about, he was talking about money, he was talking about budget. So we want to get into some of these different systems and the cost, and we also want to get into the nation building conversation as well, as brother is going to show us some of the aspects of what he does very physically. So it's on you, Brother Mac. As you arrange your camera, we want to see the goodies.
I appreciate you, brother. So,
Yes,
so what I'm going to show you here, beloved, we're talking about, because what this STEM file shows, as all the stuff you just gave us a preview that we're going to get into, I always am cognizant of this show, particularly for me personally. I think of the young people, generations who will be watching this information. And so I'm always cognizant to make this a teachable moment, so to speak. It's called a STEM file.
Please.
And when I watch your other guests, I love every guest you brother have on. And I'm right there with my notepad like a student, like you were saying, Jabril. It excites me seeing us in these different spaces. So I'm going to go a little nerdy, and we're going to go into some of the tech, and then we'll bridge it to make it applicable in terms of how we utilize it. And again, brother, this is what I'm going to show you here is just a smaller scale, that this is not necessarily on the scale of a residential system or even utility scale, but the principles are all the same. The technology is essentially the same. The battery chemistries, and even in some cases, the battery cells I'm going to show you are used in the big stuff, including electric vehicles. So let's get into it. So batteries. You tell me, is that? Can you see that there?
You good? We see it.
Okay. So I'm going to point, and I'm going to take individual ones and grab one at a time. So over here, I have some 18650 cells, lithium ion. I also have some 2070. I have some lithium ion pouch cell style. I have lithium iron phosphate. These are individual cells that we put together in series and parallel. Here. And then over here, I have a large lithium iron phosphate battery. So let's and then next to each of them, we have what's extremely important. We'll talk about your BMS, the battery management system circuitry. So you put this laptop down, and then what do we actually do with it? What I've been doing here, we're going to get to next. What I've been building. These are actually items I built. These are actually solar generators. These are toolboxes that we actually build that actually has a lithium battery. It has an inverter. It has a charge controller, and it's a self-contained unit that you can take. You can take this camping, bucket out, grid down, zombie apocalypse. It has 120 volt outlets for your AC loads. It has USB ports for your DC loads, as well as a cigarette lighter here. It's all switched. It has lights on top, so if you're in a grid down system, you can turn it on. This is the reason I'm not turning it on. I'm literally haven't finished wiring it. These are I'm actually building right now for customers. And then these here on the bottom, again, these are right now same thing. This is just a way bigger version with a big inverter, way more powerful. And this is a grid down. This could power most of depending on how large a battery I put in here. This could power most of the loads in your home. The smaller one is more just a portable laptop, light, so on and so forth. But we'll talk about what determines how much these units can power. That makes sense? Let me lay this down here.
Yes, sir. That was awesome. I want to break down for us real quick. I know you did it part one, but just in case our viewers may have forgotten, you mentioned circuitry. You talked about series and parallel. So just for us very quickly and briefly, what's the difference?
Great. So in solar, Well, and battery technology is being used today. Hold on 1 second.
Take your time. Take your time. We locked in. We enjoying ourselves on this one.
So we're teaching. Oh, see this battery? This is one battery I didn't show you guys. This is super heavy. This is what we call AGM. This is a lead acid battery. This is a seal lead acid. If you see on here, I put some. There's no vents here. There's no hole. There's no way to
lift it up
water.
a little bit.
Sorry about that.
Yes, sir.
There's no way to water this. This is some Velcro I had because I had my charge controller sitting on this. But this is a traditional deep cycle seal lead acid. But the most important thing when I said seal lead acid, most important thing in that is that it's a lead acid technology. This is still in use. This is the foundation. And lead acid batteries go back literally since the 1800s. Electric cars are not new. There were Ford Model T cars, and there were other electric cars, yes, going back from the early 1900s. If you're a car guy and you watch shows like Jay Leno's Garage, you can see them. They have tons of old cars that were built, Model T4s that were electric. My point is, those cars utilize all lithium, lead acid batteries. Today, everything we're primarily focusing is on lithium ion. So, to answer your question, I'm gonna go a little nerdy in terms of what the fundamentals you need to understand about all batteries. The considerations we have. The main consideration is what chemistry, whether it's seal lead acid, whether it's lithium ion, and lithium ion. There's two types of lithium ion that we use. It's lithium iron phosphate, which is safer. It's safer and it has much longer life cycle, and we'll get into that. And then lithium, what we call NCO, nickel cobalt oxide. Some of the other ones I'll show you here, and the difference between those two, the NCO chemistries have a lot more energy density. That's what's in your Tesla vehicles.
Right. So like more energy per square foot per inch, right, or square inch.
Correct. But it's not as stable and as safe. Those are the batteries that are more apt, to have what we call thermal runaway, to catch fires.
Okay.
Whereas lithium iron phosphate, that chemistry is so safe that even if you were to puncture it, shoot it with a bullet, stab it, and you go on YouTube, there's tons of videos of people doing that, it will only off gas, but it's not going to catch fire. It won't have a thermal runaway. So most of the batteries that you see now in residential systems and whatnot, they're going to be lithium iron phosphate technology. I utilize both, but my thing is that it's a matter of whatever the particular application is. But all things being equal, lithium iron phosphate is usually your way to go. But with the limitation, there's pros and cons of both. So to answer your question about the difference in the chemistries and whatnot, so let me show this something I had on here in terms of series and parallel. So I mentioned, and in the right here I have just a couple of batteries wired together, put on these and each of these batteries 3.7 volts per battery cell for this particular lithium ion technology. If I'm using lithium iron phosphate battery, then the nominal voltage, what we call nominal, meaning the operating voltage per cell, and each of these is a cell, it's an individual cell. And here I have 4 cells. So this is a 3.2 volt cell, is 3.2 volts, and has 50 amp hours of capacity. This is 3.2, 3.2, 3.2. So to answer your point, Gabriel, about series and parallel, going back against our own law, in series, voltage goes up and current stays the same, or amperage stays the same. In parallel circuitry, your current goes up or is additive, and your voltage stays the same. So if I have these 4 cells, these 4 lithium iron phosphate battery cells, right now I have them connected in series with these copper plates. Each battery has a negative and a positive, negative and positive, negative, positive. So if I go negative, in this case, this is my negative home run here, so to speak. This is the positive on this first battery. This is the negative home run. This is a positive. So I go from my positive and I join it with the negative of the next battery cell. And then
Right.
that same battery cell, I take the positive and I connect it to my negative. And then
Right.
that same cell, I go down and connect it to my negative. And then I'm left at the end with this negative and this positive. This positive. I'm looking at my computer screen. So
I see.
I'm looking at this
That's
negative
negative. Yep.
and this positive. This is where I would connect my wires to power my load. But since I'm connecting them in series, so Jabril, take your calculator, but you're a math genius, so you can do in your head. If this is 3.2 volts, and I've added in series with 3.2, 3.2, 3.2. So if I take these 4 cells and I put them in series, 3.2 times 4 is what?
12.8.
12.8. So this is essentially now a 12-volt battery.
Right.
I could have taken 8 of them and just continued on. It'd be 3.2 times 8, and my nominal would be about 25 volts. So it'd be a 24-volt battery.
Right.
Again, I could put 16 of them in series, and I would end up with a 48-volt battery.
Right.
And the reason those voltages, those numbers are important to read is because in the off-grid or in solar renewable energy space, those are the voltages we primarily are working with. We're working with 12 volts, working with 24 volts, and the bigger off-grid system that will do at your home or for a grid tie with battery backup, or off-grid, it will likely be a 48-volt system. With few exceptions like Tesla Powerwall and LG Chem, some of those are what we call high-voltage DC batteries that are in the 400-volt range. But those are more the newer exceptions as relatively new lithium-based type batteries that are specific for home applications or commercial. But the ones in terms of end users that you're more likely to work with is going to be 12, 24, or 48 volt. And the more important thing is, the other thing I'll say, to show lithium iron phosphate chemistry, nominal voltage is 3.2. Lithium ion NCO is 3.7 volts. So they have different voltages. And that's important when you're talking about building a battery, because the most important thing I want to show is that regardless of the chemistry, they can take different forms. Now, you're looking at these batteries, these look almost like a small textbook style. This is what we call a prismatic cell. This is a prismatic cell. These are what we call cylindrical cells. This one is actually lithium ion. It's a pouch cell, but it's a cell. It's a 3.27 volts, 4.4 amp hour cell. And once you understand the different chemistries and whatnot, it's all the same. You're connected them in series and in parallel to make the voltage or the capacity that you want.
Absolutely.
And does that make sense so far?
That makes sense. And I'm going to thank you again. Like I say, definitely geeking out, family. If y'all haven't liked, y'all haven't commented and shared this content, please do. Again, we are the STEM Files live right now on Facebook, on YouTube. Make sure to follow us and subscribe on YouTube, and also follow us on IG and Twitter at The STEM Files. I want to get into one of our favorite, topics. Pull this up really quickly for us, Brazilian engineer Tariq Cardiac. We talked about a little bit about nation building. You said, and I quote, or I'll paraphrase, but I'm ready to do some nation building for real, right? Absolutely. And I love when you said that, because it's really about time for us to start to not only talk, not to say that everyone's just doing that, but to start to really see what separation, what nation building looks like for us as an individual, where our skill set fits in, and then we get in with definitions where they fit in. So going back to the different grid tied or the different types of solar power, our sister Yolanda asked about, do they differentiate in cost? Is there one that is particularly generally more costly than another? Does it depend on your capacity residentially? And then another question was, what would it take to do this in a community? So to have a small to mid-sized community interconnected through solar power.
Right. So 2 great questions. Repeat the first question again.
So going back to the different types of grid tied, non-grid tied systems, 3 different types you mentioned, do they differentiate in cost? Like, is there one that like this is going to generally cost, the most, and then how do they vary from like type to type?
Sure. Great question. Thank you. Thank you for the question, sister. So let me get to grid tech, because that's the easiest to answer. We talked about this in my first interview in terms of how all solar companies, when you call a solar company, say, I want some solar panels for my house to get rid of my electricity bill or reduce my electricity bill. The process for all of us is the same. Everything starts with your electricity bill, meaning, sister, we're going to look at what your kilowatt hour usage is. The other important thing to factor in is the utility where you live, meaning wherever you live in the country, does the utility provider who provides you electricity, do they have a net meter agreement? Because that's also important. It's a super important variable, because that's going to go directly to you getting reimbursed for what your system is producing. Excuse me. And more importantly, if they don't have a net meter agreement, then adding battery storage makes the most sense. And I'll explain that why. So let me get to your audio question, the cost. Non-grid tied, no batteries, by far is significantly cheaper. And what I mean by that is, again, I mentioned the biggest cost in solar when I started by far were your solar panels. In the 10 to 12 years I've been in this industry, it's precipitously dropped. So,
wow.
So when I started, someone might have 12 solar panels, maybe average 3 kilowatt system on their home. That, by the way, the average U.S. home needs about a 5.25 kilowatt system in terms of the amount of solar panels on their roof, with all with the right conditions to meet 90 to 100% of their electricity needs. So we're going to use a 5 kilowatt or 5,000 watt as our benchmark. When I started in the industry, sister, a 5 kilowatt, so all solar companies are going to look at your electricity bill, will determine whether you need a 2 kilowatt, 5 kilowatt, 8 kilowatt. That's the first thing. What's the wattage of DC solar panels do we need to put on your roof that's going to have enough sunlight for where you are in the country? I'm in California, so the metric we use is about what we call 5.5 hours to 6 hours. The state in the country that has the most sunlight in terms of what we measure is Arizona, Southwest. Of course, if you're up north in a temperate zone where it rains and you're not going to get as much direct sunlight, then we have to compensate. We have to add more solar panels because you're not getting as much sunlight. Does that make sense?
Right. Yes.
Right. So all companies, first thing we're going to determine is looking at your electricity bill. How many panels do we need to put on there to produce enough power to get rid of your bill? Now, so if you have solar company A, B, and C, they're all going to say, well, hey, sister, you need 5,000 watts of solar panels. Now, from there, this is where it gets to the cost, to answer your question. Solar company A may say, well, I'm going to take those 5,000 watts and charge you $5 per watt. Solar company B may say, I'm going to charge you $5.50. Solar C may say, I'll charge you $6 or $7, so on and so forth. So when I started in the industry, the average per watt cost was $9 a watt. $9.
Wow.
Meaning a 5 kilowatt system, you would be paying $45,000 for that system. Now here's the great news. Before you have a heart attack, sis, everyone listening, solar panel prices has precipitously dropped so much that same 5 kilowatt system today, as we're speaking, you could get for about average $3 a watt. So you're talking about $3.25, $4. Some parts of the country is more. California, we have more solar companies than anywhere else, so it's more competitive. But other parts of the country, your pricing is going to be higher. It could go as high as 6 or 7. I'm just talking grid tied. But my point is, it's dropped as much as today. You could potentially be paying $15,000 for a system that you were paying $45,000 as recently 7 or 8 years ago. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
So that goes to the heart system in terms of the pricing. Now, when you say, well, Brother Mac, I want to add batteries now to this system. I want a grid tied, but with battery backup. I'll give you a simple formula. An average battery, regardless of the technology, doesn't have any that you could basically add another $10,000 onto that cost. So if you're looking at $15K for a grid tied, add about, and again, this is a rough, add about $10,000 on if you're going to integrate a battery system. That's where we are. I know that's nothing to sneeze at, but again, to put it in relative terms, if you asked me that question 5 years ago, Brother Mac, how
Right.
much are my batteries? I would say 20,000. Add 20,000 to that. So
Right.
it's going down and it's on the right trajectory. And right now, as an industry, most utilities either fear and or hate solar companies, right? For obvious
Mm.
reasons.
Right.
Now, in few cases like California and some of the other states that legislature have more progressive policies, we're under a mandate. Solar companies, solar is mandated in California. Matter of fact, our building code changed at the end of the year where any new home built in California has to have solar panels, any new construction. We're also on their mandate that all our utilities have to purchase at least, eventually we're going to go 100% all renewable. California also passed a law that we're going to have all electric cars, I think, in the next 20 years. I could be wrong. But my point
Mm.
is, wherever you are in the country, they're relatively hostile to solar. So unless they have specific policies that they're pro. So that goes, but my point is more and more solar being proliferated throughout the country, that affects the marketplace and it affects batteries and cell technology as a commodity that is getting cheaper and cheaper and is going to eventually benefit you as the end user as it already is. Does that answer
Thank
that?
you.
I
So,
wanted I
yes,
wanted to get real numbers.
and you definitely did, sis. I pray that you got your question answered. He's seen the answer from me. He got me thinking about some things. When you think about, how you can start to implement this in your own life. I love when we have guests come on and they're able to give us, again, like we were talking about before the show started, that practical application of the knowledge that they're sharing, right? People always like to say knowledge is power. But, as I've gotten older, and I'm grown as an engineer, as a scientist, and really start to understand successful people, it's applied knowledge that is power. Right? When we think about, and I love breaking down that equation for power in terms of work divided by time, force times distance over time, or force times speed, right? So then when we start thinking it like that and breaking that down, we have to apply the knowledge. We can't just have it exist, throw it around,
Yes.
right? And then like, hey, look at me, I know stuff. Well, okay, what did you do with it? How can it work for me, and how can I advance myself, my family, my nation? So yes, you said, yes, sir. Thank you so much for breaking this down. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for being on.
And your second part of your question was about nation building, right?
No? Yes, about nation building specifically. Like, what would it take? We want to do a small town, small community, and we want to have this thing running solar. So walk us through that a little bit. You know what I'm saying? Take us through that.
So I'm glad you mentioned that. My company is called Sunkofa, Sunkofa,
yes,
Sunkofa Solar. And so I'm glad you volleyed that because you just gave me a reminder, Brother Jabril. I know it was in the news, particularly some Black Center news outlets, that there's a community of our people who bought some land somewhere in Georgia, Greater Atlanta. I think they bought a couple hundred and they planning to build a community. So anybody who has a plug with them, put them holler at your brother, because I know the conversation myself with some of the people in my circle, we've had that conversation by reaching out to them to do exactly what you're referencing. So here's the thing. I'm going to answer it this way. And I'm going to use that particular community that's in the, building. I assume, I know they purchased the land. I saw some video clips where all the families, matter of fact, it's a YouTube clip I have saved on my phone where the sister's talking about the motivation. But to my knowledge, they haven't broken ground yet. So let's use them as a case.
Wilkinson County. It's Wilkinson County, Georgia, I believe.
Okay.
It was 19 families. They bought 97 acres of land.
97 acres.
To create freedom. Yes, sir.
Right. Perfect. So to answer your question, since people would think if I'm doing, essentially what you're talking about is a microgrid, right?
Right. Yes, sir.
Where you're essentially self-contained. Again, the principle's all the same. It's just different scale. So you remember we mentioned you can have a full, truly off-grid system. So if you told me, hey, Brother Mac, I'm commissioning and hiring you to fly you out to somewhere in, I don't know, a small village in Nigeria, and we don't have access to any utility grids, or the lines that are there are so sparse and intermittent that it's functionally not usable, right? So I would say, okay, well, we essentially have to build a microgrid that is truly not grid tied. It's truly autonomous.
Yes.
So again, the heart of that system is three parts in all solar systems. It's your battery, it's your inverter that we mentioned, excuse me, and your charge controller. That's a device that takes the solar panel power and then it charges the battery and then it controls the charging to protect the battery so it's not overcharged, and it also protects it from actually. I didn't show this, but I'm going to show it when we go back because I want to go back to it. There's a main component I didn't mention when you're building batteries, which is super important, particularly lithium batteries. This device is called a BMS, a battery management system. And basically, when I build a battery, I'm going back to the big question. When I build a battery, I actually connect it to the battery first, because this is the brains of the battery. Because the battery cell doesn't know if you're going to overcharge it and cause it to catch fire or the gas, or if you're going to discharge it and end up destroying it. So this becomes the brain of it. This actually watches the voltage, and it also balances the cells to keep them in balance, so on and so forth. But I'm digressing because that's the important point to answer the sister's question when we talk about nation building and microgrids.
Yes,
so
sir. Yes, sir.
Going back, if I was doing it in a remote area, anywhere in the world, I've mentioned Nigeria, but anywhere on the planet where I don't have access to a utility grid, then again, the most important thing, sis, we need to do in that scenario, again, we have to determine what the load is. So you're seeing these reoccurring things, just like I said, well, I want solar from my house. Well, I ask, well, what's your load? And that tells me how big a system you need. So in this village, we're going to have primarily residential homes. They'll have central HVAC systems. You may have a pool for a pool pump. You'll have the, garbage disposals, the fans, the lights, the outlets, so on and so forth. So the first thing, the same way we do as electricians, electrical engineers, that when you building a home, I have to take load calcs to the city for my plan set to be approved. It's the same thing, except this time I'm doing it for multiple homes, for a planned community. So anytime you see new construction going on, part of that permitting process is that developer has to go to the utility of the city and say, hey, in my case, Edison or Georgia Power or Duke or wherever you are, do you have enough capacity to feed this community? That's huge. The same considerations a utility company has to have, you have to have. And I would say, really, it's more critical for you because remember we mentioned any utility that's in the 48 contiguous states with the exception of Texas, and Texas is the only state, they have all the utilities in-house. Texas doesn't buy power from other states and they don't sell. They're Texas. But my point is, all utilities in the remaining 47 contiguous states, not including Alaska and Hawaii, that's what I'm saying contiguous, they can all pull power from their respective grids. They can feed power, share power back and forth, right? But in off-grid, if you ain't got it, you ain't got it. There is no place to go, hey, let me go borrow some extra capacity from somewhere else. So my point is, when you talk about microgrids, it's super important that you have to do your calculations to have an idea of what we're going to be starting off with, to use that community in Georgia as an example. Now, if they say, well, hey, Brother Jabril, we want you to build a manufacturing facility. So now we're talking about large motors, three-phase motors that will require three-phase electricity, meaning 277, 480 voltage to power high-end industrial scale devices versus the residential scale in your home that only requires 120 or 240 volt split phase. Then we're talking about a whole nother thing. Then that means you need extra capacity. Power is super important, and that's why it's critical. So in the case you're talking about, sis, if we're talking about off grid where that community in Georgia is not tied to the grid at all, then they would need batteries, and what we do basically like the container boxes. There are companies that make container box style ones that you can load them up with these different batteries. We would connect that with the solar panel array, and then we would have a basically essentially a small control system like in any utility. When we build megawatt solar farms, we have a control house with our relays and our PLC relays, and we have what's called voltage transformers and VTs and I'm having a brain loss. CTs, excuse me, current transformers.
Yes, sir.
and the voltage is much higher because that's for you're doing utility transmission and distribution. In the case of a microgrid, we're not doing that. We're not using transformers necessarily to step up to 200,000 volts because we have to carry the current across hundreds of miles. Where it would be an enclosed community. Now, to answer your question, I would say maybe an easier way or a more cost-effective way to ramp up if I was doing a community like that is to maybe do individual battery-based systems per home, because that way
Mm.
you can make it. Each home can be its own individual system, right? Self-contained, and you could weigh that against the cost. And again, the only reason I use that is because when you're talking to scale in solar, usually the per watt rate is actually cheaper because why? Like any commodity, if you're doing volume purchasing, the per price goes down. But if you're talking about a community like those, you said 16 families, Brother Jabril? Was it 16 families?
19.
19 families. So again, I don't know their pocketbooks or how they're financing. I'm assuming they're bootstrapping it and self-financing. But
Mm-hmm.
if they have some avenue where they have a big pot to play with and say, hey brother man, we got, money's not an issue. We got a few million. We want to do a full centralized um, microgrid where no, we want the container box size batteries with basically a substation that would power all of our homes and wire our homes to that central unit. You could do that. I would probably say, and again, this is me freestyling. I haven't done any math or engineering on it. But again, if we're dealing with a finite budget, just from a practical standpoint, doing individual homes, electrifying them individual off-grid individual systems might be more practical from a financial standpoint, with the eventual goal that as a city, we will eventually create our own larger microgrid system. And then also,
Yes,
and I'm
sir.
gonna give you the floor, Brother Gabriel, because you're so brilliant. I can see the wheels turning. um, that as an insurance, right? They could easily hire an engineering firm to build a small substation to tie in to whatever utility might be in the area, Georgia Power or Duke, whatever energy, just getting going. But again, if we're talking about nation building, then the eventual goal is that it's true autonomy, not in a symbolic way, but in a real way where we could tell any utility, because again, even for a practical standpoint, if they have to tie it in initially with that respective utility in the area, well, it ain't free. Duke Energy is going to
Right.
charge you. Georgia
Right.
Power is going to charge you. But you can run the numbers to start off. It may be more practical to do it that way. But again, the eventual goal is to be truly autonomous in a true nation building way. That's where we're going with it.
Yes, sir.
If you're talking about nation building in terms of nation states, like let's say on the African continent, then that's a different conversation, and we could unpack that. But I hope that answers the question.
Definitely and thoroughly. Family, family, family. Unfortunately, it's at that time. That was
It sure
one of
is.
the quickest hours that I've ever had on our show. Again, this is the STEM Files, the voice of STEM talent in Black culture, every Thursday and Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm Jabrillion Engineer, always joined by Tariq Cardiac. Pardon me, family. He wanted me to let you all know that unfortunately he had to handle a family affair and had to jump off, which is why he hasn't been on. Family, thank you so much, Brother Matt, for gracing us with your presence again, getting us into the nitty gritty and taking us back to engineering class, because that's what I felt like I was in. Family, if we did not get to your questions, please pardon us. I know there were a few questions. Brother Daniel Forex was heavy in the comments. We also had Tesharo Aldonza. Is that family?
Tesharo, that's my older brother. Shout out to Tesharo.
Okay,
He's out
yes,
in
sir.
New York.
Shout out to you, Aldonza family. But yes, Brother Daniel, he made a good point as we close. Because, my mind as an engineer, I'm always thinking redundancy, right? So if we're autonomous, I want us to be smarter than the devil. I want us to be smarter than competition. So okay, we all on the same earth. We're going to get hit with natural disasters, X, Y, and Z. Allah's going to try us, right? But we know we the God, so we can move and roll with the punches. So okay, even if I make a microgrid, it's still a grid. So if I get knocked out, that's everybody. Versus like you said, if we do, each home has its own battery pack, everyone might not get knocked out, thereby having redundancy And also, if you have a linkage to a broader system somewhere through some type of mutual agreement, friendships in all walks of life, as the lessons talk about,
Yes,
now you have redundancy. And redundancy is needed and so advantageous when you talk about engineered systems. So thank you so much for coming on the show. Like I said, we're after 7. We didn't even get a chance to get into Black Panther.
No.
I wanted to touch base about that because they resurrected my man Killmonger. It seemed like then it's like one camp. So okay. So listen, you got to tap into the geek chats. Man, you got to tap into the geek chats. So floating around.
I got one single hot take. I got a quick hot take, but go ahead.
All right, yeah. So we're gonna rap about it real quick. Just gonna geek out real quick. So for Black Panther 2, there's 2 camps, right? Recast King T'Challa, don't recast King T'Challa. I done seen 18 different Batman, so I can see another King T'Challa. Well, you know what? He can go. We can recast it. Shuri, she was Black Panther in the comics. You know what I'm saying? Well, is she a strong enough character? Yada, yada, yada. So what I do know, I think as of right now, Killmonger is to make a return. It's so funny because my wife was talking to, I told you he wasn't dead. But I'll say, how you give him a whole bar at his last, before he dies or expires, for him to come back? He gave a whole bar. So that was my thing. I was stuck on the bar. I was stuck on the bar. So I'm like, you can't bring him back after the bar. But that's just me. So you'll give you a hot take as we close.
Yeah, no, listen. So like I said, my last hot take, I had half of New York mad at me about my Biggie take. So
right.
I get other folks mad at me. Hey, I've done a 180. Chad Boseman, our beloved ancestor. It goes without saying. I think we all feel the same way about that brother. More importantly, the biggest thing in terms of everything I know about this brother, and I've voraciously watched even a lot of interviews with his living brothers, again, truly understanding the man. But you could tell a tree by its fruit it bears. So in his case, I know the tree that he was based on the works that he purposely chose to do, like a Sidney Poitier or other people in their career, that he always chose role that edified us as a people. So now it's extremely purposeful. What I've since learned is that Brother Chad was, me being in LA, I've been around tons of celebrities, athletes, so on and so forth. And that's not saying a lot. I've been in California for 32 years now. Many of them, I'd venture to say most of them are not people they're just not people that the way people fawn over them, you'd be really surprised. The issues that a lot of these people have are not people you want to aspire to be after. He is one of those exceptions. And I mean that specifically, that he was super conscious. I've heard him reference, people from teaching Elijah Muhammad to Dr. Jeremy Clark, Dr. Ben, our master teachers. And so he knew the knowledge. And so my thing was, when his passing, like most people, emotional, I was like, it shouldn't be recast. I've changed. So my hot take is, I believe T'Challa should be recast. Mm-hmm. It is not a zero sum. It's not either or. I want to see Shuri take that mantle too. But my point is, what's caused me to evolve my particular take is that character, the strong black male leading, it needs to exist. And more importantly, I believe the biggest thing that's changed, I believe Chad Boseman will want somebody else to take the mantle. Everything I know about this brother's spirit and his principles, his personal constitution, he was absolutely about us and not me. And he wouldn't want that character necessarily to die with his personage, because he understands, as the whole theme of that character, the Black Panther is a mantle. It's not necessarily a person, but T'Challa, that person, and I might be contradicting my original point, that there's so many stories to tell. And I just think that, people have mentioned people like Denzel Washington's son, who was in Tenet, the brother Yahya Mateen, who played Dr. Manhattan,
right?
HBO version of Watchmen. I mean, they got brothers who could do it, who I won't necessarily say have the thespian chop that Chad Boseman has, because Chad Boseman was a true thespian in that truest sense, especially if you watch him in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, his last role. I mean, he's going to get an Oscar. It's politics. Oh, no. Just same way they gave Heath Ledger for oh, no, he's getting it. He's getting it. Hollywood's going to give him a posthumous Oscar. Mark my words, bank on it. You could see that I said that. So I'm not saying that those brothers have his acting chopped, but they would have to do the same discipline. Learn he mimicked T'Challa's accent after Nelson Mandela, and the Kosa. He was such a deliberate, beautiful, disciplined brother. But I think that
Mm.
character should live on, and somebody else should get a ring. So that's my hot take.
Yes, sir. Well, it's not so hot to me. Like I said, the strong black lead, we see the importance. And if you've ever had a black male teacher, you ever had a black male coach, the energy hit different when a black man who knows what he's about walks in that classroom, whether he's teaching math, English. We got a different swagger to us. We command the room differently. We have a charisma that even our black women don't have. And because the male is not like the female, right? The way we carry a room and move a room is so important. So I'm in agreement that I'd love to see. It's hard. The thing is, like, it's almost like, so I have mixed feelings because I feel about Black Panther the same way I feel about Iron Man. I think Robert Downey Jr. is Iron Man.
I agree.
And it's hard. It would be so hard for me to see another Tony Stark. Like, I'd be like, yo, like, because the thing is, Robert Downey Jr. looks like Iron Man in the cartoons and stuff. It's like unprecedented.
Some people are born for specific roles. It's like he was born for that role. Yeah.
Right. But as we close, so we want to make sure that we get it. How can people get in contact with you for everything, solar related, for the work that you do, questions, about residential, commercial, etc. Want to bring some stuff up here, and you can close this out.
Yeah, thank you, good brother. Again, I'm honored to be here. I just absolutely love. I don't geek out about most people. I'm geek about you, Jibril, you and Tariq. I'm a fanboy. I'm a fan of y'all, truly.
Praise be to Allah.
And I'm a grown 47-year-old man, but I'm geeking over two brothers who are young enough to be my child.
Yes, sir.
Again, I'm honored. You can reach me. Anyone can reach me with, my personal email. Sankofa website is still not launched yet, but my info, you can contact me at info@sankofa.com. I own the URL sankofa.com and sankofasolar.com. So when I launch the website, you can contact me through both. I'm California based. My team, I have a small squad team, brothers, how we do our business model. We will travel. Like I said, we did some in Alabama last year and the year before. We have some we're working on coming up in Atlanta. And then, again, I'm part of a larger network. I think I just kind of showed you a preview in terms of the solar generators. That's something that we're working on eventually making some kind of teaching module. For those who want to learn that, because there's a whole DIY community on YouTube where you could do a lot of that stuff, learn some of that, but I think I'm definitely going to formulate my own.
Yes, sir.
But yeah, if the main thing I'll say with me, anyone who potentially may want to work with me, we don't do the used car salesman thing. We give our people the highest value, and I take the legacy of our ancestors as builders. We work for perfection in terms of how we go about our workmanship, and the brothers I work with are high integrity, high honored men. That's how we get that. It starts there first. And that's it, man. Thank you, good brother. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Well, praise be to Allah. Thank you so much for coming back on. Family, if you love our content, want to support our content, you can Cash App us at the STEM Files. Again, that's the STEM Files on Cash App. Love y'all, family. Until next time, this has been the STEM Files, your brilliant engineer, Tariq Cardiac, and peace and love and blessings, family.